welcome the President and CEO of the Hawai'i Tourism Authority, John DeFries, and the Managing Director of Justataad, Denaye Hinds, in conversation with Global Tourism Reporter Lebawit Girma.
John and Denaye, so nice to have you here today with us. We're here to talk about tourism and communities. Now, we've heard this topic various times throughout the day today, throughout our event. But actually, just before our discussion, we even have breaking news coming out that the US government has just extended the land border closure between the US, Canada, and Mexico. And this really is an example of the huge impact that tourism has on communities, especially when it's land borders. But what we're here to look at today is a more critical side, which is how to build stronger relationships between the industry and the various players within the industry and their communities in their backyards. Last year, much of the industry had a major reckoning. They realized they needed to be more collaborative with communities. They realized that communities needed to be stakeholders in charge of decision-making and not just seen as beneficiaries or projects. And so both of you work significantly with communities in your respective roles. John, you and I have spoken many times in the past, and you've mentioned to me that last year you decided to join the Hawaii Tourism Authority because you felt like the industry was really catching itself and was trying to change course. I really want to mention for our audience too that you're the first Native Hawaiian CEO to lead HTA. So looking at you joining when Hawaii was devoid of tourists, to now being super busy and handling a lot of the same challenges as before. What's top of mind for you now as you get close to your 1-year anniversary leading the HTA?
Thank you, Lily, and aloha to you, Denaye. It really is a pleasure to be included here. I'm probably 10 months into this assignment, and this issue about the industry and community, for me, I carry a job title at the DMO that obligates me to the industry here in Hawaii, the visitor industry. That concurrently, I also have a family name that can trace its genealogy back to the first canoes that landed here from Polynesia. So my day-to-day function and my existence is not bifurcated by the industry and the community. In my life, that seam is artificial. I choose not to allow it to prevail. And as a result, I have obligations to not only industry in the success of commerce, but also to my own family, neighbors, and the people I grew up with. What I've learned in the first 10 months is really more of an affirmation. It affirmed an instinct that I had. And here in Hawaii, it's important to understand that in the communities, there are currencies other than cash that have to be reconciled. And that comes in the form of clean water, clean air, healthy forests. Our coral reefs are brimming and all of that. And we need to understand and respect that. But among the most important currencies is trust. And without it, we go nowhere, right? We go in circles.
Yes.
And so that trust for me is, the thing I love about it is you can't buy it. You can't leverage it. You've got to earn it.
That's such a great point. Yes, trust as a number one concern. Absolutely. So let's talk about some of the specific tools that you've both been using in your respective fields, and that tourism businesses could use in bridging that gap with the community and making them an integral part of the value chain. So Denaye, your background is quite unique. It's in civil and environmental engineering, also in sustainability and resilience. And as you've said to me before, it's not build it and they will come anymore. You use
exactly.
You use a tool called design thinking methodology in crafting solutions for your tourism clients who range from destinations to hotels, I guess, eco lodges, and so on. So can you sort of explain how design thinking methodology works in bringing together tourism and community?
Yeah, no, sure. Thank you again, Libby, for having me. And hello to you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Being from the building and design and architecture industry, engineering actually industry, I thought there are many tools that we use, such as design thinking, that can be applied to tourism. So I call it designing tourism, right? Purpose-driven design thinking. You know, because before we often approach things very siloed, and we can't afford to do that anymore. The traditional way of looking at building design was very, you know, step 1 through 5. You kind of have certain people who kind of come in at different stages, and then it's not until you get all the way to the 5th step that everyone kind of comes together. But when you get more into this integrated approach, when you look at sustainability from design, you kind of bring everybody at the forefront at the beginning. So when I look at designing tourism for a purpose-driven design thinking methodology, we look at adapting those traditional ways that you would think about, you know, building design, and you apply them to tourism. And you first empathize, integrate, and consider. So we empathize with the community that we want to get involved with, and when we're looking at tourism, to bring them in as and integrate them in as a stakeholder. And then we consider not only the community, but also the environment. And then we define what we want from that tourism, and looking at what that tourism product is and what that tourism value chain could entail. We also look to focus on feeling and human-centeredness, because that's important, right? And then we align those again with sustainable development goals, because they're important. Nature tells us a lot of the things that we need to know already organically, just instinctively, as to what we need to do to kind of move that process along. So we need to always consider, when we're thinking about designing tourism, making sure that communities are involved in this process, but also because they're the ones, you know, they're the lifeblood of what happens, right? They are the ones who will understand whether or not this makes sense or if it doesn't. So once we define that and we focus in on human-centeredness and design thinking, and we align those with our sustainable development goals, and also just nature in general and sustainability, we're able to ideate and innovate from that, right? And then from that ideation and that innovation, we're then able to move forward and then determine, okay, how can we then utilize that, test that, and implement that, and just make sure that we're including everyone into that whole design thinking kind of framework.
So you've got different players, you know, from the architect to the community member, so that the design is sort of more inclusive. Is that what you're?
Yes. So we want to make sure that we have an inclusive design from the beginning, right? So when you look at traditional building design and apply that to tourism, you look at all of the stakeholders that need to be involved, right? And you say to yourself, where does community kind of fit into this? And they need to be right there at the beginning, along with all of your other tourism stakeholders and destination stakeholders.
Right. But that's for a relatively sort of at the beginning stage of a project. And what about, you know, those that are now trying to redirect and rebuild better? Is it also applicable for that?
It's definitely applicable. You can always integrate community in throughout that whole process. So you have 5 major steps when you're looking at this, right? Okay. And so there's no one set area where someone is siloed in and you only exist in this one space. They all exist throughout this entire process, so that everyone's giving feedback and you don't have to worry about not missing out on one step. And the implementation and the testing just helps it to be cyclical and continuous. So you're always kind of checking back in with these major stakeholders to understand, what am I missing from a marketing standpoint, straight through down to a visitor experience standpoint, a service standpoint, accommodations, you know, your typical tourism value chain, but how are we making sure to integrate this process with community, with innovation, and with, most importantly, sustainability?
Okay, very interesting. John, you've been overseeing a similar sort of trying to be more inclusive in decision-making in tourism through what's called the DMAP, or the Destination Management Action Plan for Hawaii's top tourism destinations. Can you explain to us how that's been working and one of the major lessons from that process?
Sure. And let me first say that's the first I've seen of Denaye's work, and I resonate with that really strongly. I come out of a resort development and residential master plan development period of my career. And so those principles very much align. Specific to this destination management action planning process, here what you're showing our viewers is the report that you can find on HTA's website, Maui Nui is in reference to all of the islands that make up the county of Maui, which would include Molokai, Lanai, Kaho'olawe, and Maui itself. And so this process started, and let me say this, there's a big debate always about making sure that the community has a seat at the table. I've concluded that the community is the table, and the community issues the invites. And communities today, in Hawaii especially, and I'm sure it's true around the world, they're not going to be spectators to their own future, nor should they be. And the level of talent, intelligence, diligence, resourcefulness, all embedded in our communities. So this process started with bringing together a diverse group of residents of Maui that come from different walks of life. And I think in the case of Maui, it was somewhere between 18 to 20 on that steering committee, and talking about the hard truth, right? About the hot spots, the friction points, the problems, the things that they value the most, and began to prioritize that and put a framework together that not only identifies the hot spots, but it also identifies the actionable items that in year 1, year 2, and year 3 can be addressed. Once they put the framework together, then it's opened up to the community at large. And these community meetings could end up with 200, 300 people. And the thing I love about it the most is they're willing to talk about the tough stuff. They identify not only the problems, but in most every case, they've got a portfolio of solutions that actually make sense. And that's what we're focused on statewide.
Wow, that's great. So could you give us an example of either success or challenge of from the DMAPs, going from that moment where you're in the community and you're saying, okay, what do you want to see for your destinations, to then having something implemented?
Let me tell you what every island, every first meeting, one of the first things that comes up is, can you cap the number of air seats onto our island, right? And most people lament the fact when they hear it, that interstate travel is embedded in our Constitution in the Privilege and Immunities clause. And so what you can do is appeal to our airport system, to the airline executives, but far be it from our governor being able to establish a maximum number of seats. But once you get past that, let's stay on Maui for a second. Very famous road to Hana, right?
Okay.
2 lanes if you're lucky, 1 lane where you wish there were 3 lanes. So you got 52 bridges you got to cross. You got very fragile communities there, and you've got too many vehicles that are stopping along. It's so picturesque that everybody wants to stop every mile and take another photo. So we've had to engage, and let me say that this is an important tool, the interagency collaboration between state and county agencies that have jurisdiction, multiple jurisdictional areas, right, that have to come together. So, whether it starts with something simple like a no parking sign and enforcement, whether it comes with dissuading people from driving and taking a certified tour that you would enjoy more. So those kinds of steps are being implemented as we speak right now.
Okay. Any early results that you can share with us as far as that goes?
Well, for one thing, there's no joy in the number, for me at least, in the number of citations. I heard some number, because every citation means that there's a violator, right? So eventually, our biggest job is visitor education and making help the visitor understand that it's in their best interest to follow one of the pathways that our agency is trying to create for them so that they can be safe and the community can feel at home in their own community.
Okay. Let's switch to, obviously language and messaging is a huge tool in terms of bridging tourism and communities together and agreeing on a message. Denaye, you sit on the board of CREST, Center for Responsible Travel. How does the way in which destinations communicate about their communities need to improve, or what are some suggestions you've seen there through your work at CREST?
I love this question, and I often think that CREST shines a light on how we approach this. You know, we look at responsible travel as something that's this kind of rustic, kind of specific type of tourism, but it's every type of tourism, right? So in my mind, I think when we message and when we talk, and you saw in some of the slides earlier, that tourism starts before we actually get on the plane or before we take that trip. How we explain, anticipating guest needs is important. And that's, I think, the role that communities have a special ability to play. And responsible tourism has the great ability to play, right? Because we're able to say, listen, the people who understand what type of authentic tourism we are the most are those communities, are those players, are those people. Like John said, they're the table. And I think hearing from them specifically in terms of those messages and in terms of how we look at marketing tourism, and not just having, someone who's not involved in the community or not involved in the destination market it, you can sense the difference. And authenticity really comes from involving those stakeholders, such as those communities, those indigenous tourism entities, into how we speak and how we talk about the destination before we even get there.
I agree, and I think earlier also we had a localer say that the planning stage was now becoming more important, for their visitors in terms of before they get to the destination. John, I want to quickly, because we have so much to talk about, but we're running out of time. I want to pull a question from earlier today, which was actually directed at DMOs, but we didn't have time to handle it. And it came from Selene Mattis, who's Executive Director of the International Institute of Tourism Studies at George Washington University, and very much an expert in Indigenous tourism. And her question was, beyond the shift in messaging and marketing, which we've talked about a lot, how are tourism boards actually supporting dispersing travelers to lesser known communities and areas? Any response there?
Sure. Well, let me go back to that DMAP process, right, that we're in on every island. It's within that setting and the discussions, conversations that happen, that you begin to identify where in various communities there's interest in opening experiences or attractions on a limited basis to the visitor. And typically it's those that are more entrepreneurial, who have some level of confidence that they have the capacity to do that. So we have people within HTA who are engaged with networks on every island. And as those opportunities make themselves available, we're able to link them with some of our marketing contractors to make sure that they can derive some level of visibility in introducing them to the market. And authenticity is the value statement going forward. And in Hawaii, the Native Hawaiian cultural practitioners have much to offer. And those who believe that they're ready to share this beyond the shores of Hawaii are welcomed. And we do our best to support the launch and growth of their business.
Thank you. So from what we've discussed today here, strengthening the relationship between the industry and the communities and bringing them together involves so many elements. Everything from marketing to using some of those design concepts we just discussed with you all. And it also involves inclusivity. And really, for me, it sort of points to this, without communities, there really is no true sustainability in this industry. We can't speak of sustainable tourism without communities. And so, we're a year in, travel is starting again. What is your number one advice for tourism leaders, those who have a seat at the table, in terms of embracing that sort of building with communities? What would be your one comment and advice? Denaye, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll start off. I would definitely say to rethink what it is that you're currently doing. Also, make sure that you involve as many stakeholders as possible, and make sure that you test and ideate, don't just sit back and say what's been working for me before is going to work again. We really do need to look at different ways and how we approach tourism. We need to make sure we engage with the sustainable development goals, because nature, again, is organic in terms of solving problems. So utilize that as a tool to move forward with how you're going to solve through a lot of the issues and challenges that you're having, despite a lot of the things that are going on. And just know that your best assets are your people. We're authentic, we know these things, and don't count them out. They're there, make sure they have a seat at the table, and make sure to include them.
It reminds me of I think it was, I'm trying to remember who said this on one of the panels today, but it's sort of, I think it was Secretary Schreier, actually, from New Mexico Tourism, who said, if you're not at the table, you can't win. And so, John, any major advice from the last year? I'm coming back to you to wrap up. Oh, are we not hearing you? Okay. Yes.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I was saying that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so you got to be careful about that, right? But the one thing I want to say to the industry leaders is quit referring to the community like it's some third party to the equation. The community walks in daily into every one of our tourism enterprises and makes that enterprise operational. Mm-hmm. Okay, without them, there is no tourism operation. All right, so I go back to this point that this seam between tourism as an industry and the community is artificial. Get over it and begin to see this holistically, because some of the best ideas reside in that community population that you employ.
Absolutely. That's such a great point and such a great place to wrap up. Get over it. Work with communities. They make our industry great, right? All diverse and inclusive voices. So thank you all. Thank you both for being here today and for, your really valuable perspectives today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Aloha, Denaye. Aloha, Lily.
Aloha.
Thank you.